Come on, silly. You fetch this, and then you can watch the lecture. It's going to be a great lecture. Social Contagion. Final size, we're going to compute it. We're going to figure out how to compute it for threshold models, all sorts of models on random networks. Pretty cool, right? Yeah. And then we'll talk about the whole influentials business, right? We'll figure out if it's just because of one person or many people that things spread. And then we're going to see what happens when we put groups in our networks. Very exciting. Come on, you can do it.
All right, so I had a few, okay, so I know you've had a lot of fun to start with, and now I have to talk and destroy all that fun. Sorry about that. So a couple of things I wanted to talk about. I need some sort of rant section, I think, like something, it needs a frame, and I'm not sure what to call it, but this is not a rant, this is great. So I've got the love from Strogatz, got a retweet from the Strogatz on the, he's in them, so I guess it's not all, yeah, but, I think it's kind of right. So I was amusing myself by replacing, I've done this, replacing the word love in anything with retweet. It's kind of funny, like retweeting in a time of cholera, war and retweeting. So, I mean, it's bad, but there's like, this is because it's a little bit of love. A little retweet is a little bit of love, right? So I will always retweet you, those sorts of things. All right. And I'm not going to sing them because something in my contract that says I'm not allowed to sing. Okay, so you make me sick, I unfollow you. All right, I've got these things. So I want to talk a little bit, there's been a lot of stuff coming out recently about big data not being everything. And maybe you've seen some of this, but people saying, well, it doesn't solve all the problems. I mean, it's true that in the business world, people are running around saying, we have the big data and we will know everything, right? You get some stuff about the end of theory was a piece that appeared in Wired. We talked about it in one of our reading groups. So you don't need theory anymore because, and it's true for some of the big businesses, there's just a lot of correlations in these data, these huge data sets they have, and they can do things, right? Google can do useful things. Lots of examples just because we just have so much, Amazon can provide a reasonable service and as far as, connecting you between different books based on what other people have done. Things like translation and spell checking, those things are much, much better than they used to be because they're based on tons of people's input. But it's this ridiculous thing where when it comes to science, people will say big data is not everything. Of course it's not, right? So it's absurd to even have to talk about this. I mean, it's always been theory and experiment and simulation, whatever you can do with those two pieces, theory and then observation. My daughter's grade 4 class, observation is #1 on what science is, right? Go and look at things. And so it's as if someone's opened another window, pulled up the curtain over here, and you say, no, I don't want to look in that because I have the theories. I want to stay over here. It's just nuts. Anyway, I don't know why people talk about this, and they're all patting themselves on the back and saying, let's go back to theory. It's wrong, you should. Anyway, I just need to say that. Let's see. So 1/12. So we're 3/4 of the way through this. 3/4. I love to say 3/4. So we'll get to quarterology next week. It's a particular cult that's spread pretty badly, actually. So, but 1/12. That's not very big, right? But it's the difference between truth and lies, between good and evil. We'll talk about that. Darkness and light. That's coming up. So it'll be all part of a big thing on scaling, which will kind of take us towards the end of the semester. So, all right, Strogatz, we love Strogatz. Please retweet me too. Okay. All right, good. Love the retweets. Oh, push the wrong button. Okay, come on. All right, so we got this extremely interesting model. This is this is Duncan Watts's a variation on the original Granovetter model, which was about people copying each other, imitating each other when they could see what everyone else is doing, which itself was inspired by Schelling's model, which was a localized, difficult thing to analyze, actually, right? So the checkerboard segregation model, this was a particular problem in mind there, was something, it was a simulation, but it was hard to analyze that, quite hard, and still somewhat hard analytically. You can make some approximations and so on. We do have a bit of a fetish, particularly, well, in lots of fields, particularly oddly enough, economics and say physics, where if we don't have a theoretical analytic model, it's just not it's not right. It's like there's something wrong. Like it just means, and that's a reasonable sort of feeling. Like if you can't describe it in a reasonably simple way, reasonably simple might include horrible partial differential equations. But, you know, then you sort of feel bad about it. It's like you feel bad about showing it to the next person, you know. Anyway, who tells you in your seminar that it's bad? All right, so we get this funny thing that depending on the connectivity of these, so these are pure random networks, as we tune up through average degree, we get this very interesting behavior. So no one's connected to start with. This is a threshold model. Everyone has the same threshold. That the largest component of vulnerables, so they're the ones that switch on because of one person, one of the people in their neighborhood switching on, they'll copy, they start wearing Ugg boots. There's only this one small region, really, of connectivity where there's a macroscopic group of them. All right, a large enough component that you can see it from space sort of thing. So no one's connected here. Now everyone's connected, but there aren't many vulnerables anymore because they've got enough friends. Right? So in this case, it was having more than 5 friends made you a non-vulnerable. Then you needed 2 or 3 or 4 of your neighbors to turn on. So that's why there are these 2 phase transitions. And there was this very odd behavior about the final cascade size. So when it takes off, and this was a good point, when it actually does take off, which is becomes rarer and rarer. So this is not exactly the probability of taking off. That's another piece that we're leaving out. But it becomes very rare here because the Achilles heel becomes very, very small Achilles heel. But boom, when it takes off. So the next piece that I want to talk about today is this final size. I want to talk about that, and then I'll get onto some other kinds of networks. And there are all sorts of ways you can go. That's always the problem with these things. We start off with toy models. We get a good understanding of them. We add some bits and pieces, and then things go everywhere. All right, so we move through this. I wanted to explain, if I can, the connection between Granovetter's model and the Watts model. So the mean field or all-to-all network with how that connects to random networks. So in the Granovetter model, we had, so here's an example of the distribution of thresholds, right? So there's a little peak here. This turns out to be a critical mass model. It turns into these cobweb diagrams. So if you integrate this is the small f, this is capital F, that's a cumulative distribution based on that. So you integrate it, then you take off with your cobwebs, then this one, this initial condition takes off to 1. There is an unstable fixed point here, so anything starting below peters out, goes to 0. And that's a kind of a critical mass model. So if you can somehow exogenously get enough people on board to start with, then in this little system it will take off. Now what that means is there's no way that with that same distribution of thresholds, there's no way that one individual in a very large population will ever trigger anything. Now, what this shows you is what you've seen in the previous couple of slides, which is the response as a function of the average degree of the network. So if you travel out here, eventually you get to infinity, or an all-to-all network if it's a finite number of nodes, and that's what this plot applies to. So this plot is sitting out here on the end of this thing. So for one over n, nothing ever takes off, right? One guy never takes off. So you come back in and you start to say, all right, well, let's take away the links in this network, and now people are seeing less and less of what's around them. Eventually you get to this crazy transition where there's now a tiny little group of people who will copy each other, right? So as soon as one of them turns on, they all turn on. So that makes, so there's a little match in there, and then makes a little tinderbox, and then the whole thing goes boom. It's like a little, yeah. And that's, that takes off. And then eventually you remove enough links that no one's connected anymore, and nothing can spread. It doesn't matter what the contagion is. This is the sort of the complement to this is the case where you have a lot of gullibles and a lot of people who are somewhat impervious to the spread. And that ended up with this internal fixed point. So the unstable points here, if you take a little cobweb diagram, you get to here from a lower point than the fixed point, and it will go down to the midpoint here, which I guess is a half in this case. So in that case, a very small number, right, 1 over n in a sense, will take off, right? So this is a very brittle system. So one person turning on, it will spread. Boom, right? So, and the big story is whether the slope of these functions at 0 is greater or less than 1. So here it's greater than 1, that's an unstable fixed point, and it will spread. And you know, the East Germany is reunited with West Germany. That's all you need to know. Okay, so some other details, I guess. So if you go out here again, Granovetter's model, this thing is right out here on this, the end of this, when everyone's connected. And this shows you the fraction of vulnerables in the largest vulnerable component. You see that's not dying away. Right? Here it goes boom, and then it's absolutely 0. This is not dying away, which connects us to this story that there's always this tinderbox, no matter how connected it gets. Okay? That's a good thing to connect these, because these are sort of funny, different pieces. They make complete sense. All right, so here's our little summary for the just the uniform threshold. I mean, we haven't even, I've showed you an example with some distributed thresholds there, but generally, you know, we got this very interesting behavior with uniform thresholds. So there's no cascades for these, because they're simply poorly connected networks. It doesn't matter what the contagion process is, nothing's spreading. When it's very well connected, now we don't have any of this social threshold kind of spreading anymore, because there are simply not enough vulnerables, right? Again, these are random networks, so something's going to happen potentially when we move to other kinds of structures. And in between, then we get this opening up of this so-called cascade window, and we have this very vulnerable state. And it's at that, in between these two cases, where the bad things happen. It looks pretty resistant, resilient, pretty strong, and then badness. Okay, so great model, lots of nice implications. Final size. So this is due to Gleeson and Carlane, 2007. So let's try and, I'll go through the mechanics of how we figure this out, because it's actually kind of the opposite to what we did to figure out how spreading works. And it took a number of years, and no one thought you could figure this out. You know, some of these things are very hard. So we want to find the expected final size if it takes off. Right? Yeah. So it's tricky. It's very hard even when we have just plain uniform thresholds. I think you'd probably imagine if you could do it for that, you should be able to do it for a distribution of thresholds, but it's really, really hard. And I've talked about this. So the problem is figuring out how these so-called non-vulnerables work, the ones that take 2 or 3 or 4 hits, right? It's very hard to see, because some of them will turn on before all of the vulnerables have turned on. It's a weird story. So great work done by, so this is, as I said, Gleeson Carlane. Actually did it for the infinite seed. So they imagine, well, what if you've got this great big network and then you sprinkle a dosage of an infection, if you like, throughout it randomly. But it turns out what they do works for 1 over n as well, just switching on 1. All right, so there's some more work and there's some links to this. This is much richer, I suppose, actually, by Gleeson later on, looking at all sorts of other kinds of random networks, right? That's the natural thing. So I'll take you through this story because it's very, very nice. Some math. Okay. You're scared. All right, so we're going to randomly turn on a fraction of the nodes, and they're going to be randomly chosen, but they're going to be a non-zero fraction, which of course is a bit odd because it means you've got an infinite network, you choose an infinite subset. It's a finite fraction. But you can imagine they're sprinkled very far apart as well as this fraction becomes smaller. So locally we have these branching structures. We should be able to think about that. That's all right. So branching structure is a big deal, and I'll have some plots to show how this works. Right. So locally around any node in a pure random network that's big enough, you see pure branching. Right? None of this clustering. So we want to move beyond that, and that's the next stage. But it's good to nail this one down. In fact, this is so well done that you get not just the final size, but in fact the dynamics. You get how it fills in as a function of time, which is pretty spectacular. I know you're thrilled by that. So it warms my heart. So we're going to look at a particular node and try to figure out how it might switch on as a function of time. Right? So it could be one of the first guys that turns on. So that happens with probability phi sub 0. That's its probability of turning on. It could be because one of its neighbors turned on in the first time step and now it sees that, or some number of its neighbors turned on maybe it's got 2 out of 10 of its neighbors turn on the first time step, and now it's going to turn on. It could be because neighbors of those neighbors turned on, and it's cascaded in. And so that's the idea. You keep moving out. All right, so t equals 0, we have that our node I is turned on with probably phi sub 0. That's simple, right? So that's the first piece. So then we have to think about as we go out in time, that it wasn't turned on in the first step, but it's because of its neighbors being on. And it's in the second time step. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. So t equals 1. So you want that the I was not, it's not a seed, it wasn't turned on, but enough of its friends were turned on in that first stage, such that it now feels the influence. And because this model, everyone, I have to remember this, that when you turn on, you stay on in this model. It's an SI model, right? It's tricky to deal with the fact that they might recover. So think about it like this. So there's no way, so you don't turn on the first time step. The only way you can turn on in the next time steps is because of this immediate set of neighbors and because they turn on the first time step. They're not being influenced yet, right? They'll be influenced. The influence from 2 steps away from you takes 2 time steps to get you. From 3 steps away takes 3 time steps to get you, right? Okay. Totally exciting, right? So this is the friends of friends, and we get into trouble with our naming friends of friends of friends, and it explodes. All right, but distance 3, distance 4. So this is how it works. So t equals m, we have to have that enough of these nodes within n hops as you move out in this branching network, within n steps of you, enough of them have to be turned on such that that has cascaded into you, right? So how do we figure that out? It has to propagate in. It's actually this little picture here, but we'll get to it. All right, so here's our node I. Come on, fight. Okay, so, oh, it's really disturbing. Moment of silence. All right, so let's see. So here's node I. This is the initial time step. These guys in red were switched on. They said, we will pull on the Ugg boots. For no good reason. Because they were paid to do it. All right, so you can see what can happen. So this one, in the next time step, this guy is going to feel this influence. There's potentially other influence here, and we're not going to worry about that. But it's going to take 1, 2, 3, 4 time steps for this to sink in. So we have a threshold of 1/3. So right, these dashed lines just show you the diameter. This guy has 3 friends in the world that they care about with respect to Ugg boots. So they switch on, part of the team. This is my second daughter. And I'll be crying on the ground because she doesn't have Ugg boots. So, and same for this one who has 3. Very lengthy discussions about what other people do. Honestly, I was just in the car this morning taking them to school and saying, your job is to resist being part of the group. Your sister's job is to be part of a group. They're like sometimes it's good to, be part of a team. Anyway, so very different discussions. Oh dear, teenagers will be great. So let's see. So this one turns on the next time step because they only have 2 friends in the world. So they're like, yes. And this one had 4, so a little bit of resilience, but trouble, right? So back here they're like, yeah, okay, Ugg boots. I'm like, Ugg boots, okay. Puts them on. So this one is going to switch now. They feel the pressure. So this worked back this way. They have 1 friend in the world, and they want to be like that friend. So this is a kind of a crazy stalker hanger on. And then there were 5 friends here, so 2 of 5, so we're on. Right? So, but what we have to do is mathematize this, which is just an awful word. I'm sorry about that. But, so we have to somehow turn this into equations. Like this process. Yeah. You're thrilled by that. Let's look at a bigger picture. I don't know why I have 2, but so we have a bigger picture. I got a little carried away. So I'll show you different colors. It's much more complicated. Can't believe I did this. All right, and then we have the initial ones are in red. This resilient fellow in the middle is like, yeah, whatever. So there's 5. They have 9 friends. So they need to have 3 of those 9 friends on. So the next time step, and you can go and look through how all of this worked, right? So all of these ones, so this was 2 of 4, this was 1 of 2, So it's a very fun little model to play with. And it's pure branching networks, right? The dashed line is not to be confused with links, right? They're just the diameter away from, or the distance away from I. It's a pure branching network. There are some gigantic loops in this thing. Random networks have some gigantic closed loops, but they're really a long way away. So from I's perspective, this is the story. So it's marching in, the thread of the UGG boots advances, and we get to here. So this is 4, and they're in. Right? Everyone's got the UGG boots on. All right, so, and then some of these will never, they'll be, well, this one's going to switch in the next time step, and this will start moving out. But you need to pick up the network at every point, really, and then look at the branching network around it. That's what you need to do, right? So if we were worried about this guy, we'd pick it up and then let the tree around it coalesce, right, or form. Form. Right. So we're going to do this statistically. We're going to think about just one representative node of degree k. What's its friends like? All right, let's see. And I know Gleeson's done some work. He's all over this. He loves this. Very nice fellow. So he's done some work where you can see you can figure out something if the nodes are going off again. But that's a big part to this calculation we'll have, that they don't become inactive again. UGG boots for life. All right, supporter straight. So this actually works for all sorts of contagion processes. Very, it's nice. It's just the response function can be all sorts of things. And I mentioned this. We actually get the whole time evolution. And you can back out the probability of cascades and so on as well, although it's nice to have the derivation we have, which is very direct and shows you the physical story. Lots of stuff. In fact, you get to this, really. You need to really do this. But we get the probability that a node of degree k will switch on at time t, and then you can sum over all of them based on the probability of having a node of degree k. So we'll have to do that. You can handle asynchronous updating. So yeah, I know you're thrilled by all these possibilities. But just to say, it's richly done. All right, so this is what we're doing. When we're thinking about whether something takes off, it's an expansion story, right? So we put the UGG boots on here, and we look at whether it spreads. And we do that statistically, and we see if there's an adoption rate of greater than 1 of pairs of UGG boots, then it's on. And we mourn for society's decay. But now we're thinking about kind of the opposite thing, right? Which is contraction around a node. Yeah? Yeah? It's quite nice. Right, so whether it takes off or not is the expansion. Whether or not, the final size story, whether someone gets infected or not, is this contraction around a node. But they're both branching networks locally. Okay, so let's do some math. I'm sorry this has to happen. Okay, so this is the story where after this, we'll denote it like this. So this is the probability that a node, so it's the phi of k sub comma t, so it fits in with our biggest story of phi. Phi is always the fraction of individuals as a whole that are on. So phi sub t is the fraction of individuals that are on at time t. And we're interested in phi infinity, right? We want to see what the eventual number is. Very nice things come out of this. So that's our definition. This is similar to beta. It's a b. It's going to be a bit bigger. But it's probably that. It's an interesting thing. So this you calculate out of your response functions, right? So before we were just worried really about what's the probability if one of your neighbors is on that you become infected, right? That was when we were figuring out this vulnerable story. We only needed to know that piece of information. So that's actually BK1, right? That was key to the takeoff story. But now we're talking about the whole thing spreading, so we need to know what's probably a randomly sampled node of degree k. Thresholds have been assigned in some random way as well. What's the probability that they become active when they have j of their friends on? Okay, so we start with this. Universally, it doesn't matter what your degree is because this is exogenous. Of course, you could make this a function of degree, but we'll start with this. we're randomly turning nodes on with, right, we got every node and we flip a very complicated coin, and we get with probably phi sub 0 that it's on. So let's look at our node, our first node, and see what happens. Again, think about those pictures. We're looking at a degree k node, and we're looking at the first time step. We're worried about that first time step. This is the, probably the, right, so j of its nodes, j of the k neighbors, right, of this degree k node were on in the first time step. They were switched on to start with. Maybe I should draw a little picture. All right, so this guy's got k friends, and some of them were switched on in the first time step. And we're interested in what's the probability that j of them were switched on. Well, there are k choose j ways of choosing j of them. For each one that's on, we have a probability phi sub 0 for that to be switched on, so phi 0 to the j, and all the other ones have to be off. So it's a little binomial story, okay? Good, 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 very nutritious. We like to count things. Combinatorics, right? Everyone loves combinatorics. So, no? Yes? Hashtag combinatorics. All right. All right, so we have this degree k node. The probability that it's a seed is phi sub 0, so we have that. The probability that it wasn't a seed is 1 minus phi sub 0, very simple. So we're going to combine these two pieces. We'll say the probability that it turns on at time step 1 is the probability that it was on at time step 0, it doesn't turn off. The probability that it was not turned on at time step 0. And then this piece here, so we sum from j equals 0 to k. So this is the number of neighbors that are on potentially. And this is the, so right, this is the probability that j of them were switched on. And this is the probability that you're infected because j of your neighbors were on and you're a degree k node. So it could really be, anything could go into this B here. We want to think about the threshold one, but anything could go into that B. How do we feel about that? Super duper? Yeah. With the sums and the things. All right. That's one time step. So hopefully we can build this out. We'll have to think about this a little bit. So usually it is links that help us, right? So phi sub t is the, we have phi k t here. Now we want to look at theta kt. So this is this is for edges. Right. This is coming up, so I'm just scribbling because I'm crazy. Okay, so all right. So let's see if we can work this out. All right. So we need to know what's the probability that this edge coming in was infected. All right. So we have a degree k guy at time t. We want to know, is that edge coming in? Is the edge that's coming in, is that infected at, is it active at time t? And because they switch on, you know, if it is on, stays on, we can think about that. So we move to this. We want probably a theta sub 2. And it will turn out that we can think about this in general, independent of the degree of this guy. Because this is just some, it's a randomly wired up network. So the probability that this guy has, this one is active, is independent of this node. You can mess around with this and put in correlations between degree, and then you have a different story. But this, for this simple model, turns out to be just theta of 2. It doesn't matter what this guy's degree is, because you're just looking out at your friends here, and they'll have some story, but that's OK. All right, so we have that. So we'll think about this for a second. The theta of 0 is phi of 0, actually. So they match up at the first time step, because the probability that this edge is active is the probability that that guy was switched at time 0 is the probability that this guy was switched on at time 0. So this is a bit, you know, these things are very separate things eventually, theta of t and phi of t. But at the first, they match, right? So we have a similar story to the t equals 1 case. We're just expanding out, so we have to figure out what this theta of t is. But the probability that the ith node turns on at t plus 1, and is the probability that it was on at the first time step. And then the probability, so then we're done, if that's true. The probability that it wasn't turned on, and then we have to sum over, and so this looks exactly the same, except now it's theta of t. So when t equals 0, we actually collapse back to what we had, because this is theta of 0, which is phi of 0. So this all matches, it goes back to what we had. But now we have to think about this. What's the probability that an edge coming in at time t is active? And that will have depended on what's happened out to t time steps. Or t minus 1 time steps, my brain exploded. But there's some, right? Okay. So this is the ith node. It has a degree k sub I. So we can sum over all of these guys. So we sum over all of these. We weight them by their degree, and we'll get an overall phi of t plus 1. So there's still this phi sub 0. If you sum over, if you multiply this by a pk and sum over everything, you can get a 1 for that. But we sneak this guy in here. We've moved k. We'll group them together. We'll group together all of the degree k guys. And of course, we have p sub k. That's our overriding story for this network. What's the probability that a node has degree k? Sum over all these beasts. And now we have the evolution. We have the time evolution of the fraction of infective. So this just took a very nice, you know, afterwards, of course, it's obvious. This is the way science often works. But it's a really, you know, it's a good story. It's clean. But we had to move away from thinking about kind of expanding out from the vulnerable component. Like you sort of feel like it should grow out of there. And that's how you would figure out the final extent. It's a completely different viewpoint. It's about how it contracts, how this spread moves in, how those zombies kind of march in with their Ugg boots to you, right? You're in your house with a shotgun, and you're trying to, you know, keep it together. But they're marching in, and you put on the Ugg boots, and it's all okay. Sorry, it's confusing. Yeah, okay, so we need to compute the evolution of this guy. We've made ourselves another problem. That's good. That's okay. Zombies with Ugg boots. All right, okay, good. So maybe it's a tautology. All right, so let's think about how theta evolves. And so here's the first time step for this. It's going to be pretty similar, but we get some changes, right? So the probability that we're looking for theta 1 here. So let's make this theta 1. So what has to have happened in the previous time step, this one wasn't switched on. There's some, we have to think about whether these guys were turned on, what's the probability that they turn this one on, and then as a result, make this edge active. Time step 1. Well, this guy was not on in the first, was on in the first time step. That's theta of 0. That's this piece. Well, phi of 0. The probability that they weren't on is 1 minus phi 0. So okay, so this wasn't on. Now we have to think about, well, were these guys on? And did they do enough to infect it? Now we have a slight change in things now, because we've gone out, we have our friend. What's the degree of this one? Well, this has degree k, right? Has degree k with probability. We love this guy because our friends are crazy with their more friend thing. So I don't know what to do about them. You should just drop them as a friend and punish them a little bit. But it's just not going to work out. Because you're just going to become friends with someone else who has lots of friends. You know? That's how you find them. It's bad. You should seek out some hermits and talk to them. That's it. OK. All right. We have that piece. So that's that little blob there. But now there are only k minus 1 on the other side as well. Right? So there are only k minus 1. This is a degree k. It has k minus 1 other friends. So we do a similar thing, but we have to sum over j equals 0 to k minus 1. These are the ways of choosing j of those k minus 1 neighbors, other neighbors. And this is the way of having, this is the probability of having j of them beyond. You need theta of 0 times j. And we're swapping theta 0 and theta 1 because they're the same. 1 minus theta 0, there's a k minus 1 minus j because, right, they're the ones that have to be off. So you have to have theories j explicitly on, the rest have to be explicitly off. And this is the probability that this guy switched on when j of its neighbors were on. Huge. Okay, so we have these beasts, we have these beasts, we have these beasts, and so we can generalize this. We get very excited. This is theta 1 depending on theta 0. So theta of t will depend on theta of t minus 1, right? Theta of t will depend on theta of t minus 1. That'll be the step before. So we can just generalize it. And this is the whole package. So we can talk about exogenous and social effects. The probability that we'll have this, this fraction theta of the population will be on at time t plus 1. Well, starts t equals 0. We have some fraction on straight away. So that's our exogenous injection into the network. And then we have to think about the ones that weren't on. And this is the thing that tells us they turn on in the next time step. And it depends on whether their edges coming into them are active or not. Okay? Yeah. So this is the, I think I'm really describing this. I got them around the world. This is the edges. This is the edges. This is edges. That's an edge. Who chose these symbols? My God. So this edge, me. So these edges, hashtag thinking. So this is for edges. Yes, that's why we have the KPK. Good. Right? Similar looking beast. And that's why there's a K minus 1 up here. All right. So that's edge to edge transition. And then we just have around, this is the condensing around a node. We have phi of t plus 1. Depends on the probability that edges were infected at time t, right? And there's some initial conditions in here. The structure of the network is here. And the infection, the contagion process is all in there. The micro details of the response function are all in those BKGs. So in principle, different response functions could actually lead to these, right? So you could have different BKJs, which there's only a finite number of them. You can imagine different complicated diseases averaging out to give you the same things. All right, so what you do is you iterate this. It's possible that you choose some things here that are pretty easy to deal with. Maybe you can do that, and you solve it explicitly. And you do that after many, so we've done some of these things, and you have pages and pages of appendices of calculations, because then it's real. And it's nice to do that. It's not bad. We did some nice things with assortative, so on. I mean, of course, beautiful work by Gleeson, but we've done some things as well. Generally speaking, though, this is another one of these iterative map stories. And the real iterative map, again, is about links. So you put in phi sub 0, my gosh, theta of 0, find theta of 1, put in theta of 1, find theta of 2, and see where that thing goes to. And once you've got theta of infinity or close to it, you put it in here. But as you're going along with getting theta 0, theta 1, theta 2, you can put them in here, and that gives you the fraction that are infected now. So you actually get, as I said, the whole time series as a function of t for the fraction that are infected. All right. So we'll get the cascade limit popping out. This is a nice thing to do. We'll get the cascade condition popping out if we take the fraction of infectives right down to 0. So this is getting close to the 1 over n case. Of course, it's an infinite network. It depends, as I said, crucially on this map, theta t plus 1 as a function of theta t, which has a bit of a funny thing into it. The phi sub 0 is in there. It's part of the map, right? So if you change the initial condition of the system, you actually change the update map. So it's, wow, burned alive. OK, so we had, I don't know, so let's say we have this map, right? So it's, let me choose a, and I just want to iterate this a few times. I mean, reiterate. OK, so here's our phi of 0, and it takes off in some way. Here's our phi of 0, and it takes off in this way. You can't actually do this because the map will change. The map is actually a function of these guys. So there's no way you get to choose your phi 0. You choose your phi 0, that creates a map, and then you see what happens. So it's a bit of a funny business. All right. If you go back and look at this function, if there are some people that just turn on for free, then this is all you need. You just need that this quantity is greater than 0. So these are the ones that turn on for free, B, K0, right? So no one else is infected. This is for the case when you have 0, right? There are no infections at all. There's no seeding. We actually start it with phi 0 equals 0, right? So we have the thing, no one's infected, and then we let it run, and it's just endogenous to the process that some individuals just turn on straight away for free. None of their friends are turned on, and they turn on. You can build that in. We haven't really talked about it, but you can build that in. You can say, this person will start wearing Ugg boots without any of their friends doing it.
And that's different from setting phi 0?
Yeah, so in fact, I guess you can have a phi 0 in there as well, but where is this thing here? So it's really, this is the G function, is this whole business here. So what happens is all of these collapse except for BK0. This, when you have J equals 0, this actually isn't counted, so it takes off. That's another piece. It's just it's a reasonable thing to say, but we're sort of more interested in when we inject things in. Okay. So it means that someone takes off to start with. So that thing will start to spread. Now, this is not actually a fixed point at theta equals 0 is the issue. It's not even a fixed point, right? So the function looks like this is really the story. Looks like this. So that means that the tiniest little initial condition, any initial condition, an initial condition in particular of 0 will take off. That's what's going on. Right? So that's the point. So this is G of 0, phi 0. If that is greater than 0, then it takes off. The other possibility is that the initial condition is such that it's 0, and then we're at the more traditional kind of thing where we're interested in really then what's the slope like. So you take the derivative of that function, set it to 0, and lo and behold, if you do that, you get this guy, right? So this is the structure we had before. This is the probability of that a node of degree k is vulnerable. This is the number of new edges that are created if a node of degree k is infected. And this is the probability of a degree k node being selected as you go along an edge. So this was this edge-to-edge story, right? So one edge, one infected edge begets, if it hits a degree k node, that's the probability it does. If it infects it, it gets k minus 1 new ones, right? So if you sum over all of the nodes in this network, and it's greater than 1, this is the reproduction number. This slope at 0 is greater than 1, it takes off. How are we doing with that? All right, so these are the words. Yeah, so we get some that turn on for free. If it's an unstable fixed point, that's the two things, then cascades turn off on as well. We have some interesting things if we have a seed that's non-zero now. That's really not just a very small seed, but out here. So now you have the possibility, of course, that if your seed was here, it would take off. Right? So that gets back to it's different to our, well, yeah, okay, so it's our critical mass model. Yep. But now it's a critical mass model on a network, which is a very nice piece of work. So we had critical mass and threshold. We've always dealt with one node turning on in the network stage. This is now a mixture of both, where some non-zero fraction turn on in the network case. I told you it was fun. All right, so we can have a stable fixed point, which is this example. We can have a stable fixed point at 0 and an unstable fixed point later on, and providing our initial condition is above that, it takes off. And as I said, this G will change as we choose that initial point. So it's not as if you can just make one G and then move the initial condition around and say, okay, there's an unstable fixed point. As you move this initial condition around, this G, this response function, this map that you want to iterate actually changes. So that's pretty bad. So here are just a few examples of what could go, how things could work. And again, it depends on, as I've said, right? So given a particular initial condition, there is just one function, and there is just that one initial condition. But let's say the initial condition is up here, It creates this function. This dies away. In this case, it's going to go up to here. So this is going to be a case where it always takes off. This is one where you need a critical mass story, right? Again, depending on where the initial condition is. If it's above this unstable fixed point, it takes off. If it's below, it dies away. And this is the first case that I mentioned. This is a case where there's a non-zero initial point. So you get all these ones that turn on for free. So it's always going to take off, even if you start with absolutely no, you don't seed it at all. People will spontaneously turn on in this one, and it will go up to here. All right. So lots of nice things, right? This is always true of these maps. The adjacent fixed points have varying, they have the opposite stability, right? So it goes unstable, stable, unstable, stable, unstable, stable, unstable, right? That's always true. You can see that funny things will happen as you dial these maps, right? So it may be that this comes below the y equals x line, and then everything goes back to 0. If, on the other hand, this moves up, everything explodes. Right? Completely explaining the fall of Eastern Europe. So I've said these things. Yes, 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 yes. Right, so you can't start anywhere. OK, that's the, I mean, it's very beautiful stuff. This G is a little, the G is about the fraction of edges that are infected in the system. So it does get, as this goes along, this is telling you exactly how many edges are infected in the system. Right? So you run your simulation, you plot it. It's not just the final point that matches up with the final number that are infected, edges, a fraction of edges that are infected. It actually gives you the complete dynamics of the thing. So look, some math, really great work, hard. OK, so yeah, and that's gone in millions of different directions. But that's the essence of that. Quite beautiful. I'm going to tell you some more things about these network models. We're going to step back and look at them in different directions. The math is going to be dialed back a little. It's OK. Let's look at what happens. We're going to go back to the pure random network models. So these are pure random network models. We're going to, so we're just dialing back to other possible cases, right? The math pieces, we've relented a little bit. All right. So we're going to look at, so we're going to make a random network. We're going to seed it with one node. Everyone's going to have the same threshold. So that simple story again, which has this very interesting outcome, the robust yet fragile stuff. And we're going to see how the spreading works. So we're going to look at all the successful spreads. Right? We'll look at the ones that really take off. So let's take all the ones that really take off and look at, in detail, some of the dynamics. So first of all, this is the, right, so we're looking across all of these individual successful spreads. This is the distribution of nodes that turn on in type step 1. Straight away. These are exogenous, right? We've turned them on. But these are the ones that led to successful spreading. I'll show you a bit more about this later on, but the point is that there's an underlying distribution that's more this way. These are skewed to the right. So it makes sense, right? The more connected someone, fair enough, right? The more connected someone is, the more reasonable it is to turn them on. So we'll address that. I mean, the logic is pretty clear. I mean, someone has more friends, you want them on your side. That should always be true. Well, let's look at how this thing spreads. So in the next time step, these are of these successful spreads, the ones that really take off. It turns out in that next time step, just time step 1, well, you can't get any of these individuals, right? Because they need more than one hit. This is a thing where everyone who has degree 5 or less is vulnerable. It's a branching network, locally branching. So in that very first time step, the ones that start the thing, the initiators that start successful spreads, nice big distribution here that's a little more skewed than the underlying one. But in the next one, there are no degree 6 guys, or 7 or 8. I mean, it's a finite network, it's a simulation. But there are lots of degree 5 ones who helped. And there are actually more degree 5 ones than there are more degree 1 guys, or there can't be any degree 1 guys, degree 2 or 3, relative to the underlying population. There's actually a bias towards these. So let's think about that. So time step 2, we still have that structure. We're starting to see, because there are some loops in here, we're starting to see some, occasionally some node 10 guys are involved because there is, it is a finite network. So there was some things. And then you start to see this build, and you start to see this double hump coming up. And it's the 10s and 9s and 10s and 11s that are really making this thing go. Right? And so that's true here. It's true here. You've gotten through most of the vulnerables. Eventually, the ones that are involved in the big spreads, as time goes on, start to look like the underlying network itself. Right? They start to look like the general population. But the early adopters, so if you like the early adopters in this spreading mechanism, have this peculiar kind of distribution. And what's really happening is, well, you have to get to the ones that are vulnerable to start with. So we'll zeros out, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1s are useless because they can't spread anymore. 2s can influence one other person. But so 5s are great because they get to 4 other people. So it's quite reasonable, right? So you want the most influential vulnerables. So you want people who are gullible and tell as many other people as possible. You want someone in the middle. So it's not, right? So this is a different game. It's a very different game because it's a system level game. You're trying to find those ones, not the ones with no mates whatsoever, not the ones with tons of them because they're harder to influence, at least as regards this mechanism, this specific threshold mechanism. And eventually the 10s and 11s start to help you because they're taking 2 hits to turn on, but they get 8 or 9 other people. So they're great. So you like them. So you like them more than the 6s, actually. So a bit of a funny thing. So let's try to quantify this in some way. And I'll just show you some pictures for all of this. OK, we'll talk you through it. So here's, again, random networks. What we did was we took the top 10% in terms of their average, their degree. So you take the top 10%, you separate them off. And then we looked at the ones who have the average degree. And so you've seen this plot before. This is the average cascade size. So it doesn't have the sharp edge here because we're actually averaging the outcome, right? So again, there's 1 here. So no one's, this is a story where the average degree of the network is going across here, pure random networks. We're dialing it up. We have the fact that no one has any friends here. Starts to be connected. Eventually, there are no vulnerables left. So what we're trying to look at here is, well, do these top 10% ones do a much better job than the average ones as far as seeding the spread goes? Right? What's the benefit to going to someone who's in the top 10%, paying them some money to eat your cheezels or whatever they are? Cheezels? No, it's an Australian thing. What are the cheese things that look like that? They're boluses? Cheetos, okay. They're already shaped. Was it vanishing, what was that thing? Vanishing caloric density or something so that your brain doesn't feel like you ate anything? That's good, yeah. I think they're a good example of that, apparently. So anyway, so you can see that actually, just looking at this, you think, oh, well, I mean, you get some benefit, right? But it depends how much it costs to get to these people. So this is then a number of comparisons. So this is the ratio of the degrees of the people who are in the top 10% versus the average. So that's always greater than 1, right? And so it's up here. This is the gain in terms of the reach. So this is always less, what have I done here? This is less than 1. Sorry. There are 3 pieces here. There are 2 ratios and then a ratio of ratios. So this is the ratio of the degrees, so the top 10% versus the average ones. So that's greater than 1. This is then the gain in the cascade size ratio, which is also greater than 1, right? So generally speaking, these guys do better, although it comes pretty close here. And you always have to be careful when you have steep drops like this. They do pretty well here, right? They do much better here towards the margins. So this dashed line then is a ratio of the gain, the ratio of the cascade size ratio and the degree ratio. So what do you get, right? So you want that if you doubled, if you took so here's the average degree of here's the degree of your initial person, maybe it's 5. It would be very nice if you went to the degree 10 person and you got more than twice of a population as a result of choosing them. That would be great, right? I mean, it's likely that it's going to drop down, or maybe it's equal. But the case is, in this example, that generally speaking, you don't get a In fact, you get less of a gain here, right, if you're comparing those two ratios. So it's not bad. So I'll show you a few more of these. But the point being here is that you're not getting big returns to your investment. Like, it might be better to, and you have to figure this out, it's not in these plots, it might be better to seed, there'll be in some others, to seed 5 individuals of degree 2, 3, or 4, rather than 1 individual of degree 15. And it depends how much it costs, right? But it's not obvious that you go for the people who are most influential, because you're trying to get out into the network. And obviously very evil things are being done by Facebook and so on, that sort of capitalize on these ideas. Okay, so this is another example. This is something where we have a more of a skewed distribution for the influence or the number of friends. So we're moving away from these Poisson ones. So there is a, so now you see this stretches out, right? So the top 10% nodes in terms of their, what we're calling influence here, but their average, their degree is much higher. We're tuning through this network. So again, we see no spreading here, eventually no spreading here because there are not enough vulnerables in the system. You start to see these margins come in a little bit, right? So this is the degree ratio here. It's decreasing as we go up in average degree. This is the cascade size ratio. So you see this kind of pops up near these edges. Now, it becomes less likely for things to take off here as well, but you're getting more of a gain. And then so these shaded regions show you where this gain, if you like, is greater than 1, where you're getting a benefit. Right, so by I mean, you really are truly getting a benefit. You're getting a, so right at these points here, there's just a linear relationship between the degree of the initial guy and the final size. Here, you're actually getting a super linear kind of growth, and here you're getting sublinear. Right. Now, let's start to think about things that are not just pure random networks. So you can construct, people like to do these things, you can construct simple networks for which spreading actually takes off very strongly, where it would never work in a random network. So these are, kind of very artificial, but this is a situation where, right, these first two, they have 3 friends, they get switched on, and because of the clustering here, these ones get switched on as well, and it just really explodes, right? So this is a case where you have a threshold of 1/3. Nothing would spread like this on a random network. It would always be blocked, pure random network, but here, it takes off. So you start to think, well, let's look at some more realistic networks with groups. Okay, well, I like these things. So a few harmless flakes working together can unleash an avalanche of destruction, very important. So let's see. And so there are some interesting, very, I think, great implications here. So this has been a reasonable thing. That's what's driving these random networks. They're easy to get at, they're analytic, but there's also, you can always say that they're sparse, and that's a real thing. Right? That's a real thing for complex networks. Degree distribution, we know that. That's a big deal. We know that's a huge deal. Still, random networks, even if we have an arbitrary degree distribution, is not enough. So we're missing clustering, we're missing really group structure, actually. So these things are a bit harder to deal with, but they're very natural. There are bipartite affiliation, simple bipartite affiliation groups, and we've looked at some of these. Of course, in different areas, and I'll have them up again. Here's another variation. So the idea here is you have groups that are randomly connected themselves. So there's an Erdős-Renyi graph of groups. And then you have a connection within groups, and then across these, sort of this backbone as well. So that creates some flavor of those, of a real, social system or other kinds of systems where there's, extra tethering, right? There's stronger ties between local groups. So we can dial these things up and down and play with them. So that's a reasonable kind of toy model. I've showed you these things quite a lot. There's the bipartite affiliation. I'm going to skip through them. The identity story, and then we can create what we call these generalized affiliation model networks. And we'll do something a little extra what we did before. So we're going to connect nodes in these hierarchies with this decaying probability, right? So if you're in the same if you're right, so it's like if you're similar to each other on some dimension, there's a good chance you're connected. As you move away in this identity structure, it's less and less, and it decays exponentially. We'll add a couple of other pieces in here, so we'll talk about this as being homophily. We'll sort of add a tiny bit of dynamics in here. So you have a probability that you become, the triangle's close, right? So that you have two friends, there's a probability that they connect. So that's not a bad thing to add. And we'll do this in complicated ways. So there's just a friend of a friend, and then there's an extra piece for within groups and across groups. Okay, so you can think about people being in different groups. So you know someone who's in, you have friends who are in different groups, and there's some chance you bring them together. There's probably a better chance that you bring them together if they're in the same group but don't already know each other. So crazy, crazy extra things. So you've seen these Cascade pictures. Basically, the short story here is that now we've got groups involved that have size 10, connect up in different ways. This is different ways of looking at it. This is the random group network is across here, and then the generalized affiliation models are across here, and they have some similar stories for each of them. This is a case where just a single seed, right? We just seed them with one single seed. The red indicates what happens for a pure random network. That's the Cascade window for a pure random network. That's on all of these. You see it actually moves up a little bit, but you kind of get the same kind of closed story here. So again, this is everyone has a fixed threshold. If you take a slice through here, it shows you as a function of the average degree of the network, what's the window in which cascades can occur. So it modifies things. What you see as you go out to the group networks, so this is a group network, and you randomly seed 10 nodes in those, right? So what we're going to do is randomly seed 10 nodes. Here's one node. We're just going to seed it with one node. If we turn on 10, which is a bit like the Gleeson model, then this Cascade window starts to open up because you get some randomness of individuals being near each other. That improves the probability of things spreading. If you seed a whole group, though, right? If you turn on a whole group, then the thing changes completely. So now you're turning on a whole group, and groups that are adjacent see two, individuals there will see 2 or 3 people in here, and they have a bigger chance of turning on, right? So your groups start to switch on. Lots of implications potentially for this. I mean, one is to move people in groups, and this is done in organizations and so on, just rather than sending individuals around. I heard yesterday about I think it's called the Posse program, which is a way of bringing people who are in minority groups or people who are having harder times of moving into, say, it's universities, right? So say I think the first program involved kids in New York City from different high schools who tested well and were brought together weekly to meet each other and to practice together, but they're all going to the same university. That was the idea. So then they go to the university and they've got a cohort of 10 or 15, so it's not just taking a group from a high school and putting them somewhere else, it's building a structure for them early on and then moving them. It's not as, this is contagion and spreading and so on, but I think there's just a lot to be said for this, the group story, right? We're humans, we're social things. All right, just a couple more pieces that I wanted to go through. So here's the strange thing. So this is another kind of random network story. Yeah, okay, I think thinking about different pieces here. So this is just yet another example. So here you can see, all right, so the ones that have got more friends do a better job. Same thing that we had before. This is the Cascade size ratio is always greater than 1. The degree ratio is always greater than 1 for it's the top 10% versus the average. Yes, they have more friends. Yes, the cascades they give rise to are bigger. And that's the gain, right? But the gain is less than 1 mostly, right? Your returns to scale. It's diminishing returns to scale, right? That's the story there. However, it's possible to have these networks, and you look at this as they're pretty tight here, and in fact, the ones that are more connected, which are the black squares, are doing worse. So that's an interesting thing. So what's happening here? So this is the ratio. So here's the ratio of degrees. So yes, this is clear, the ones that have higher degrees, the top 10% on average, when you take that ratio, it's greater than 1. When you take the ratio of the average cascades that they give rise to, there's actually this quite considerable drop as the thing becomes more connected. It goes below 1. So this is very counterintuitive, right? So the more connected nodes are doing less well. So what is going on? That's quite dismal. I mean, certainly the gain rate is bad, and in fact, it's quite awful. This is what's happening for these networks. So here's the underlying degree distribution, right? So you'd think that you would march out here and always, I mean, if you could pay to, right, get these people turned on, you might do it, right? I mean, maybe the world is restricted to you, so you can only get to these less vulnerables, and there's kind of a nice idea for that, right? So you might do that. You can pay 30 of these people rather than 1 of these. And in fact, if you do that, that's going to be a better story for you, because this is the average cascade size as a result of seeding nodes based on their degree, right? Actually starts to decrease. So what's going on here is assortativity. So these groups are connected to each other, and it turns out that so if you have a group of nodes that are connected very well, and they're connected to other groups very well, then they're all non-vulnerables. So one of them switching on can't influence locally their own group or any of the groups near them. But if you have, because we're lifting up to a high level, right? So now you have a group where individuals don't have so many friends, the neighboring groups don't have so many friends, but they can get their whole group to switch. And then that'll make the neighboring group switch, because now there are 10, 15 individuals here on board that have got the cult going, right? And they're like, yes. And so it spreads. So you can, it's another version of this balkanization, breeds kind of creativity, or not that I'm saying we should, but it's definitely, in the states are built like that, right? I mean, the states are structured, the United States is structured very clearly. The states have rights, and then and there's a thinking behind that, right? That having one big connected thing has problems, and I think it's really borne out with say in the stuff we've seen. Spreading and creativity kind of seems to work well when you have these. Innovation seems to work well. Of course, you can create gigantic, horrible things, because Hitler comes out of one of these. But anyway, so yeah. So that's a very surprising result, I think. And I can see by your faces you're amazed. But I think it took us a while to kind of realize what was going on here. Although, again, simple story afterwards, but because we were making these funny groups, we didn't realize what we were doing. But this seemed very odd. So in fact, here it's not just a question of, you don't have enough money for these people. It's actually better to influence this. This network is more vulnerable if you go to the lower connected nodes. All right, so story for this thing. So what I'll call influential vulnerables, right? So the ones that are vulnerable but themselves influential, some balance. So we see that certainly as these things spread, the early adopters are vulnerables. They're really key, but they're not necessary. Some of those group things that I showed you, there are no vulnerables in them. I mean, but they're very limited in their vulnerability. They don't have a giant component of it, but you switch on a whole group and the whole thing can spread. Maybe I should show you that again. I know we've got to go. But you see here, this cascade window opens up so much. I mean, here we have something with average degree of 60. It's so much wider than this network. You've really got a very heavily connected network, but it's vulnerable in that things can spread if you seed groups. So groups can really, really change the way things spread. And of course, we're built out of groups. It remains, and it's harder to get this cascade condition as you move away from pure random networks. We can have a nice little thing that says this is greater than 1. But it does seem to be a global story, right? It's not about one individual. We have this rather extraordinary thing, I think, that the worst cascades that we get are in networks that look robust. So that's bad. This idea of influentials are certainly things that are constructed afterwards. And it's quite reasonable to think of many possible nodes and groups being the potential influentials. All right, so I'm just going to finish with this. So you want to think about these guys. You want to create entities, the influential vulnerables. So you need things that can be transmitted, moved along, reproduced with fidelity from average individual to average individual. Right? You want your message, once it gets out there, to not change. Right? It's the telephone game. there is this point, I think, simple ideas spread well. Jokes, right? These things spread well. They have that ability to hold their form as they go through. And so this is the vulnerability story. You need people who adopt. They need to display it. And that displaying, of course, can be anything. So it can be something where just simply, fashion. I have obviously, demonstrated great fashion. So, you influence people with simply what you're wearing around. I mean, that's what I voted, right? It's not, you put it on your shirt. And that's a way of making that, because it's not obvious. Someone's walking around like, okay, you don't know, right? But then it's like, let's put it on the shirt. Political messages are harder to achieve. It's harder to say, it's harder to get to those ones. You have to wait till the end of dinner when they say that they like Amway, right? Always unfortunate. And then there's a whole complication of things, right? Many different things spreading at times, and there's not much work being done on that, and of course, blocking and combining. Lots of interesting things to do. So that is where, yes. So next, that's a sort of an introduction into social contagion. Spreading, it's huge, and I'm sure you have problems that involve it, but you have to be very careful about how you model it and really think about what you're doing. You can't take things wholesale, but it's great. Got to work on it. All right, so next week is scaling in the 1/12 business.